codeIt now. Create a multiplication table. Hint, first decide on how big it should be. So we have to choose a range for this, where we want to start and where we want to end. And I'm going to choose from 1 to 10, avoiding choosing 0 because, well, anything multiplied by 0 is just 0, so it's a little boring. So now that we know that, we need to also pick a variable for rows and columns. Shown here is I and j, a common convention, and we are going to be using I and j in our code. And it says here for any individual cell in the table, the number is I times j, and we can see that pretty clearly. So the example that's shown here is that when we're in I equals 2, so right here, we can go all the way across to any of these values. So let's say j is equal to 4. So if I equals 2, we start here, then we go all the way down to 4, which is up here. So you can see 2, 4, and 2 times 4 is 8. And they say here that the inner loop j handles the row. So what they mean by this is that I is selecting which row we want to choose to fill in. So whether we want to choose 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, and then j is the loop that's actually filling in the values for that whole row. So that's what we're going to do in our code as well. So now let's switch over to the JGrass window. Let's create a new file with Control-N. Hit Enter to select the default Java. And then let's copy some code from a previous file to avoid typing out some things we already know how to type, like the class declaration and the main method. Control-V to paste. Okay. Now let's give this a new name. Let's call it MultTable. Mult meaning multiplication. MultTable. Okay. And we're definitely going to want to get rid of this code because our code is going to be very different from the code that this was used for before. Okay, great. So the nice thing about this is, since we're just doing a multiplication table and each cell is just going to be I times j, we don't actually need to define any other separate product variables or any other separate sum variables. We're just going to be using the actual looping variables themselves to fill in the table. So let's just start making the loops. So the first outer loop is going to be I, so for int I equals, and remember we said we're going to go from 1 to 10, so I'm going to start at 1. As long as I is less than or equal to 10, I want to go all the way up to 10. We do I plus plus, so we increment, we go 1 by 1. Then we got to add in our curly braces. So I is going to be the one selecting the actual row that we want to start filling in. And then let's write our second for loop for j. So int j equals, again, we want to start from 1 until j is less than or equal to 10. J plus plus, we want to go 1 by 1 for j. Okay, and now j is going to be the one handling the filling in of each individual value within the row. So the way you think about this is that I is looping over here. I is saying, okay, when I is 1, we start here, and then j is going to go through all the values from 1 till the end of the range. It's going to go I1, J1, I1, J2, I1, J3, I1, J4, I1, J5, I1, J6, all the way up until whatever we decide to end at, and in this case we're deciding 10. So then we just need to fill in the actual value. So for this, we can just go straight away with the print statement, actually. So let's just do a system.out.print. Now, in this case, we want to use a print instead of a print ln, because since the for loop for the j is filling in all the values in a row horizontally, we don't want to put a new line until we've finished an entire row. And the way we know we finished an entire row is once we've finished going over the entire for loop for the j variable. So we will actually stick in our new line over here, meaning our print ln, and we can just leave it empty like this, and that'll just print out a new line on its own. And this way we move on to the next row. But for within the inner j loop, we want to make sure we print out our multiplication. So first, let's just put our multiplication in parentheses. So I'm just going to say I times j, and then we want to concatenate Remember, this is a concatenation, not a plus, with a string, and the string will actually just be a space because we just want a space in between each multiplication because we don't want them all jumbled together as one big number. Then we close our parentheses, add a semicolon, and it looks like we're pretty much good to go. So yeah, again, just to clarify what we're doing here, the outer for loop is choosing which row we're going to start printing the values for, and then the inner for loop of j is going to actually go through each entry in the row. So it's going to go from the first one to the second one to the third one to the fourth one to the fifth one to the sixth one by one by one. So that's why we have the actual multiplication happening within the j loop. And we add a space because we want spaces in between each multiplication. And then after we finished adding all the values for an entire row, that's when we want to print out a new line. We don't want to print out new lines while we're filling in the values of a row, because then otherwise we're not going to end up with a table. Instead, we're just going to end up with a long list of numbers, and there's not going to be columns or rows. Okay, so let's save this code, Control S, accept the defaults, Control B to compile. Great, it compiled successfully. Control R to run. And there we go. This is looking great. So it looks here like we have our multiplication table. So we can see we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So those are the outer values. So that's the value you use to read what it is you're multiplying. So now if we want to figure out, obviously, what is, let's say, 3 times 9, we can look at 3 on either the vertical list or the horizontal list. I'm going to choose the vertical, so 3. And then we go all the way down until the 9th value. So that would be this one, and we have 27. So yeah, it seems to have worked properly.